right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Troutdale Planning Commission for Wednesday, April 13th, 2022. If we could have roll call, please.
Commissioner Wittrin,
Present.
Commissioner Wydilla,
Here.
Commissioner Leamy,
Here.
Commissioner Prickett,
Will not be here this evening.
Commissioner Wilcox,
Here.
Commissioner Allen,
Here.
Chair Stephenson.
Here. Okay, at this time, I would like to ask everyone to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and Commissioner Whitford will be leading us this evening.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, is there anyone that would wish to speak to the Planning Commission this evening on a non-agenda item? See an individual in chambers. Come forward, sir.
Do I need to do something?
I don't think so. I think it's on, right?
It's on, yeah, it just.
Good evening. My name is. Good evening. My name is Saul Pompeyo, and I am the owner of Restaurante Pompeyo. And the reason I come today is about talking about parking. I know I hear the new development for Multnomah County wants to reduce the capacity of the parking. I don't know it's true, but I need to talk about how important is for downtown parking. Today, I driving for Division Street around 82nd. And Multnomah County have a new system and they lost a lot of parking. It's very difficult to parking right now in Division Street. And if you saw, many of this business, they go out of the business. If you don't have parking, you don't have business. Because parking is about visitors. If you don't have clients, you need to close. We need to protect all the parking in downtown. If they go to do a development very close to downtown, they need to have plenty of parking. Because we don't want to they use our parkings. Even Laura Stickman called me 3 or 4 months ago for ask for support. I think so you guys need to call her and ask part of that space we need to do for more parking for downtown. She works in Multnomah County and she can push to use one of these spots for use parking for downtown. They ask for support us, but they need to support us. It's important to work. You guys need to decide if Multnomah County go to manage this town or you guys go to manage this town. I know it's very rude, but that's how is it. Really is you don't have parking, you don't have business. My mom lives in another country. She don't use the car, but they have high density of population. In 3 blocks of his house, they have supermarket, bank, have everything. She visited me for 4 months and she told me, here, everybody needs a car because we don't have public transportation. Here to Gresham, take 1.5 hours because you need to wait for the bus. We do not have public transportation and the city is very spread. If you guys want to change to don't use car, you need to have high density cities. Big buildings with 4 levels, for 20 levels, and that's you can have high density and the people can walk. For many years, I hear they want the people walk more, What I saw the employees for the city, they use their own car between Public Works to here because we need parking, because it's a hill. How you can walk the hill if you don't have a car? That is one of the reasons I tell nobody will go to come to downtown if they don't have car. We need to protect our parkings. Every single spot is important. And Multnomah County needs to hear you guys. That is everything. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, not seeing anyone else, and I think we're good. All right. With that, we will go into tonight's agenda item. Wait, Mr. Danby.
Well, I will give it right back to you, Chair Stephenson, because this was really, we have an item from, that we have found internally that we would want to discuss with you as a prospective future text amendment. There's actually two. The ones that we have are pretty straightforward, but I think the one that was paid to our attention that I think you would want to share with the group tonight probably deserves top billing, just because I imagine that'll be more thought and conversation that will be applied to it. So I would
Probably, but let's start with yours is a good one.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So we have two actually. And I guess, I mean, they are kind of different topics, but they're both kind of desired to be considered pretty soon. One is a text amendment to consider some expansion of some use in the industrial area, specifically for light industrial zoning district, where, as you recall, and actually for the folks in the room, you can see it on the maps on the wall, the light industrial area are those properties that are north of the freeway exit, generally includes the 84 Corporate Center, the properties on Harlow Road, a couple of airport properties, and then there's actually a couple of small properties just to the west of downtown that are zoned light industrial. We've looked at that zoning district a lot recently in the past couple of years to consider certain uses. One use that we're seeing a lot is the possibility of auto-related activity, whether it be service, detailing shops, those types of things. General industrial properties allow for those types of use. Light industrial does not. But what we're seeing is a lot of these smaller vacant spaces in these light industrial areas are seeking that type of use. So that might be a use expansion that we might bring to you very soon for your contemplation. So there may be an additional use or two that might be considered with that, but we'll also try to get a cleaner definition as far as you talk about auto services, that can mean a variety of things. So we'll just make sure that when we bring it to you, clarify what those are and therefore what you may think is appropriate or not appropriate in that zoning district.
So it's allowed in general industrial, but not light industrial.
Was there a reason?
Over in that area right now.
We do.
Oh, okay. Quite a bit, really.
Right. So
We have several non-conforming properties, quite frankly. And so the question is, do you wish to bring them frankly into conformance? And then if you have additional spaces or opportunity to have them in those locations. So without going into the full details of it, that's just a prelude of something that we're expecting to bring to you. That's one item.
Marv, you live down there. What do you think?
Part of it is that the old federal buildings that are off of Graham and Perimeter Way, the easternmost one is privately owned now. There's a multitude of different operations, a lot of vehicle repair, vehicle restoring. And you're seeing more and more, well, you're seeing a lot of that on the dikes also, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a different operation.
But we're also seeing it a lot, frankly, in residential properties. And what we're finding is, you hear the joke about starting a business out of your garage. Some of these guys who are in there right now as legitimate businesses started as hobbyists gone wild in their own garages and eventually found commercial spaces to do it. So one argument potentially in favor of expanding this use is it allows for their activities to be more in areas where commercial activity or light industrial activity could take place, reducing them, or at least broadening the ability to find locations in this community to pursue that activity. And what we know is that it's a very popular land use right now, and it has been for some time. So the question is, can we clarify our intentions within the zoning district to accommodate maybe one or more of these types of automotive uses? How do we distinguish among them? So that's what we want to bring to you soonish. That's one of the text amendments. The other one is a completely different topic, which we can get to in a moment too. But
Do we find more of this non-conforming going into going in there because there isn't space available in general? Or is it just so happens that
I would say it's just a compatible space is available.
well, in one case, I can't make a broad assumption on that. I would say though, is take the I-84 corporate center.
Mhm.
If you've been inside that, you drive down a public street through this industrial park, commerce park, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of got commercial and industrial uses in there. The buildings look effectively identical on one side of the street from the other, but they have completely different zoning districts. Does one side of the street really matter for certain types of use as opposed to the others? Now, for things like outdoor storage, or when we're talking about other types of uses, yeah, there might be a reason and a rationale for that. Is this one of those uses? So that's going to be a question that might be before you. But again, that's just one example of where light industry has some designation in the city. There's properties also along Harlow on the eastern side, closer to the river, where there are properties that are partially developed, I'll call it, that are not effectively using the entirety of the property that they could be using, and have space for a second business or a co-leased tenant, where there's plenty of room to potentially operate something like that, but the use doesn't allow it. So it's one of those questions is, if people are doing the due diligence and they're checking in with us, which we hope they do, we may have to give them an answer that says, sorry, no can do. So
There is a piece of property that's owned by the Forest Service. That's off of Graham Road on the north side.
Yep.
Have you heard anything, any development on that at all?
That is a very complicated property. Long and short of it is it was declared surplus property. There are some legal issues right now with it, and particularly with potential cleanup activities that I couldn't get into right now. But for private development, not only for any sort of public use, you can't do anything with it for a long time. I'll leave it at that.
It's not the GSA property.
There's the Forest Service property and then are you talking about the one that's next to the Mitchell property, Marv? Okay.
Yeah, it butts up against what's inside the airport property itself, but.
So it's on the inside curve of
right
Graham.
There.
Okay.
Yeah. Probably a couple of acres.
Okay, I'm sorry. The one I was referring to was on the north side, on the treatment plant side of the road. That's the GSA property I was thinking about. That other
This
federal property, I'm not
South
I'm
of
not sure
Grand
about
Road.
that. Yeah. I'd have to look into that status on that one.
Because they kind of vacated that, haven't they?
They vacated that, the Forest Service did several years ago.
Yeah. So that's one. The second, which is a little bit more recent that I talked with you about, Mr. Chair, just a couple weeks before the meeting, was one that our staff identified, our building staff, and that is dealing with situations, particularly with patio covers and decks, and the rules that we have on setbacks for patio covers and decks. I'm going to just simply share the memo that was given to me by our staff. I'll recite from it because I don't want to incorrectly state what they found. So let me just throw that up here on screen, and I'll be happy to send that over to the Planning Commission after this meeting. But what we have here is a situation where the building code is effectively advocating for one solution, a safer structural solution, but people, because of a development code standard, are seeking to get around that standard. And the question becomes is, why do we have this discrepancy, and can we make some sense of it? So we have, I'll take it from the second paragraph. As it stands, there have been customer proposals or citizen proposals to build structures, patio covers and decks attached to their house, but based on the current development code, these structures are part of the overall footprint for purposing calculating distances to property lines and setbacks. So on lots where we have full setbacks, or if they're close to the house itself, that means customers will need to have variances granted typically by this body with no guarantee of approval. What that does then is it prompts customers then to say that they would detach this structure, this patio cover or this deck from the house. It wouldn't be physically attached to the house, which allows that to be then considered an accessory use, which lets them go into the required setback. So the question becomes is, if by inserting clampings or nailings into the main building, we as a development code currently consider that part of the primary structure and must be within the larger setback. But if it's an inch off, it can encroach within, say 3 feet of the property line. That doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. So how we handle patio covers and decks and their relation to accessory structure standards and therefore setback standards is going to be before you folks pretty soon. Because what we're seeing is people trying to build an improvement, but because of a technicality in our development code, are trying to find a solution where they can build something that might be structurally less safe to get around a setback standard. Because by attaching it to the house, which would be the structurally more safe and sound thing to do, then they are subject to the house's, the primary structure's setback standard, which is more strict.
And do we consider that an increase in footage at that point of the structure?
Well, I mean, you have the tax assessor's definition of that. The question is, from the development code standard, you don't have to necessarily go with what the tax assessor's standards may be, because the building code already doesn't give discretion on that because it's an accessory according to the building code. So this will be one where, you know, we'll give you this memo, you can read it, but when we present it to you in graphical format, it'll start to make, I don't know if sense, but you can see, you can visualize what the issue is. Because again, you can have a porch right up against the wall side of your house. As long as it's not attached, that porch can go up to 3 feet away from your property line. The moment it's attached, then you're at that side setback threshold for the main house. Does that really make any sense? And as a staff, we're not telling you what option is preferable or not. We're just saying that you have this situation. And we've had now a couple of folks who have been trying to build decks that are intimidated by going through a variance, trying to build it the safe way potentially, and then have discovered effectively a loophole that gets them out. And whether that's being, you know, using the code to your advantage or not, you know, that's fine. But at some point we need to figure out how we as a staff tell applicants what to do or what should they do, one way or the other. So we would like to visit that sometime this summer. So those are the two that we had consideration.
So you have to have a limit on what the depth of the deck or whatever it might be. Would we limit it to a certain footage away from the house as opposed to from the property line.
potentially. It's just, the other option is you could consider decks and patio covers as opposed to like, say, sheds. I think when you think of an accessory structure, most people are thinking sheds. Or, vertical projections of things like that. A deck and a patio cover, yeah, I mean, with our terrain, they can be elevated and so forth, but usually those are, at least the decks certainly are more ground-based improvements. If you have a 6-foot privacy fence on your side yard, does that make a difference? So these are going to be the types of things you guys are going to have to figure out and analyze when this comes before you is what is the solution? Are we comfortable with an attached deck or an attached patio cover to a primary structure? That if it was just 1 inch off the structure, it can be 3 feet away from the property, but if it's not, if it's actually attached, it must be 5 feet or 7.5 feet or whatever the site setback is for that prevailing zoning district.
Listening check is just, you're advocating if it's not a certain distance away, it is considered attached.
If it requires the structural support of the house.
Because I think more and more, it seems a trend as more and more decks are becoming unattached, freestanding, with your fire pit in the middle and,
Like a
but
gazebo.
it could be a gazebo type, or, you're throwing your fire pit out in the middle of this deck, right? But yeah, it's gonna be challenging to work, to articulate.
It could be. We did at least some initial searching as far as how other cities are handling this. And actually our neighbor to the south, Gresham, is actually probably has a pretty straightforward thing in which they just uniquely define decks and patio covers apart from other accessory structures. And they have unique standards and show with graphics, if you do this, this is your setback. If you do that, this is your setback. So we can show you, I'm sure we'll be workshopping this at a future agenda item. But since the topic again tonight was future code amendments, I figured we would bring this up to you all. But this is one you probably would want to study graphically to understand how, if you write the code a certain way, this could be your potential impact. But what we're seeing right now is just a loophole, for lack of a better word, but a loophole that, when we think about it from a planning perspective, sure, we're doing, we're adhering to our general setback standards, but if you're thinking more comprehensively about building and structural integrity, people may be building things that could be more safely constructed if they were attached, but they're not doing it because they're trying to maximize their space on their property. So from a staff perspective, I don't know right now if we have enough of an understanding of what the impacts are to recommend one decision or another. The only thing we need to know is how do we eliminate that propensity to try to pit one code off the other? Because we see that happening. And frankly, if I'm a resident of this community, if I'm just trying to get a simple answer for how do I construct my deck or what approval I might need for my deck, if I do it one way, I have to go through one process. If I have to go through another way, I have to go through another one. Just tell me what my one process is. So it's also a delivery of information issue too.
Just give me an answer.
Give me an answer. We're just not sure what that answer is yet, but that's what we'll ask you guys to investigate, and then we'll ask you to eventually consider for a text amendment.
I agree. I don't think this is gonna be very cut and dry.
You think what?
I don't think this is gonna be very cut and dry.
No.
Instinctively, nothing is just popping into my head to say this is right, wrong, whatever.
Different construction standards for an independent structure. So yes, you can build it not attached, but you're gonna have to build it to this standard as opposed to if it's attached, then you've got reason for the house.
That's not totally the way it is today, is it?
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
It's built to a completely different standard if it's detached.
If it's detached from the house, it depends honestly on other prevailing circumstances. Right off the terrain, things of that nature, material used. So it's not a clear-cut answer.
But do I have to have more bracing if it's detached currently?
No,
And if it's detached, there's no standard as far as how the distance it has to be detached, 1 inch or 3 feet, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Detached is just detached.
detached is just detached. And it might be fine if you're just doing, a slab or even just a small little deck that's 18 inches off grade. But in some cases, we have backyards that might be
And I-
8 feet of height, that your deck
And
is
I'm
8
not
feet
gonna,
high.
I'm not gonna lie either, and I don't know how I feel about the city telling me what to do with my property either. I don't know how comfortable I am, especially when it's in the backyard where it's not bothering me necessarily. It's
On your deck.
Yeah, yeah.
But that is technically a structure.
yes, I understand that. Just once again, I don't know how I feel about the city telling me what to do when I'm obeying the rules. So
I think more than anything, we're not necessarily trying to say, we want you to follow this set of rule or that set of rule. We're just trying to simplify what we tell people.
Yeah.
Because we had a situation where we had a very nice couple who was just simply trying to make a backyard improvement. And they drew it a certain way, which would have required a variance from this body to let it happen because it was going to be attached to the house. They drew it a different way and it would have required a building permit or a completely different building permit process. And the only difference was 1 inch off the side of the house. And,
Yeah.
what do you,
What have you accomplished?
what have you accomplished? And, that also allows them to be 3 feet off their fence as opposed to 7.5 feet. So. Yeah. We'll dive into it. It's somewhat complex. I will send you the letter that's before you right here, so you guys can at least read it. But I think the best thing we'll be able to do is to show you visualizations as far as if you do it this way, this is your potential impact. If you do it that way, this is your other one. And then show you a case study from, say, Gresham or from other communities, how they handle the issue.
Okay.
Which might be a nice segue to what you were intending to bring up tonight too, with the variances.
Commissioner Wilcox, Commissioner Allen, you have any comments, questions? No.
It makes logical sense to me.
Commissioner Wilcox?
I don't, except I can look out my back window and see 2 examples of what you're talking about.
Yeah. Other thoughts? That is no.
Well, there'll be plenty to unpack. So we'll plan for a work session for that one.
Okay. Oh, it's me now?
It's all you.
Okay, so, and can you pull up the variance criteria? A couple of you have mentioned or had mentioned that we should take a look at our discretionary variance criteria that we have. And presently it is, staff has between 10% and 30% of a variance that they can allow. And not that we've had any problems, but as I told Chris, it's what I've been told, not worried about you, I'm thinking about the next guy. And I think it just might be worth our time to take a look at it and see if we feel that there's any changes that we need to make to this. So allowing up to 30%, there we go. And one of the places that this comes up kind of is in parking, right? And this is just something that I looked at, and Eagle Ridge, I think they added a few spots, didn't they, from what they were required to do?
They were 8 over.
8
their,
over.
Their total number, yeah.
Okay, so that's not a lot, but I just want to do a little example of that one, of how that works. You got 512 spots, I believe, on that site.
I don't have the math in front of me. It was in the 500 range though, yeah.
You have 512.
Are you
and
talking about Eagle Ridge or Fox Ridge?
Eagle Ridge?
Okay, the one up the 238th and,
Yeah.
okay.
So I went at about up there at about 7:30 Sunday morning and did a count and came up with this. Okay, 512 spots, and there was 57 reserve spots that were empty, 45 compact spots that were empty, and 55 undesignated spots that were empty. 157 out of 512. Now, you have 6 units there presently that are vacated. So if we took that off, we're now dealing with 498 spots, right? We reduced that. And so 157 of 498 was vacant. And if there was basically a 30% decrease, is kind of where I'm going, what worst case scenario, that would be about 152 coming up of the 157. So in that scenario, if we went down 30%, we probably would have gone excessive. Now, it's interesting, when I talked to the people that work there, they said people like it because there's plenty of parking. But she goes, I also think there's too much parking. And I said, so if you could redo this today, based on what you're seeing, with your current tenants and things, what would you do? And she goes, maybe reduce it by as much as 50. So where am I going with this? There's no, magic answer here because things are changing all the time. But when I look at it, it's like, okay, 30 would have been too much to drop that down as a discretion, in my opinion. But also too, it may be a situation where we have to reevaluate our parking standard as a whole, because that number may be off too. But then I hear something like a business person coming in talking about parking, but a different scenario because it's not necessarily in the same area. But certainly it is an issue in the community. They've always been pretty big on parking. That's one of the reasons that we pushed to have the standards that we have today. It's just as things change, maybe we need to do some evaluating the systems that we have. But anyhow, I thought that was interesting. What do you think?
I agree with everything you are saying. I have caution as well if something was to happen with Chris. If somebody else would, 30% is a lot. 30% is a lot to, I'll say, take advantage of and move things along quickly for somebody that is not as invested in the community as maybe some of us are. And it's scary. Because you look at that, 150 spots is huge. It could severely impact, especially when it comes to parking.
How
So
many units are there?
216.
216.
It's 2 spots per unit.
It's over.
It's 2.3 total.
So this is Commissioner Allen.
Yes, sir.
So we also have to remember that not everybody's welcoming visitors yet. So that may play a factor as well.
talking pandemic,
Yeah. If you've ever tried to visit friends in an apartment building, it gets frustrating because there's no place to park. So, and then we don't want to become a burden to the surrounding areas. So I would agree with Tanny's, Chair Stephanson's thoughtfulness here.
I guess my thought of that particular time, I was thinking, okay, you're gonna have less visitors probably than you would any other time, but you probably have more residents parked.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a little bit of the high and the low on those sides, but
but I also agree that parking at an apartment complex like that, maybe there should be one standard, and I don't know how we would do it, but a standard for that versus downtown parking versus a retirement facility parking. There, it's hard to quantify everything into one box.
right,
It's very difficult.
we do have a different parking standard for downtown though. Now.
Okay, but
That location has no public transportation. There are no buses that go past.
Not at present, no. I mean,
There.
we've heard rumors
They're
that
talking about.
it's
possibly
in the
one, yeah.
long range TriMet plan, which we're apparently going to be getting an update on Friday about, but it's one of those chicken and egg things.
Yeah.
TriMet won't serve an area that's dense enough. But, you know, you have to allow for density to happen in order for the service to be justified. There's a critical number of people there now that justify it.
That would,
That
Use
probably
it.
would.
yeah.
so
This
we're
is Commissioner Allen.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
So I was also thinking that as a reminder that during the city council meeting, when we were discussing this, there was a significant pushback from the community on parking. I think that has a lot to do with what people typically see is a push for not enough parking. And that creates some backlash in the community. So it is a difficult thing to deal with, and I believe we need to get it right. And there's so much pressure to actually underdo it.
Just for clarification, because I know we're talking about the parking issue very specifically, but I mean, if we're talking about the parking issue and getting the numbers right, that's strikes me as a different type of text amendment than maybe the one I think you were trying to introduce. I know you were
Yeah.
using what you were trying to introduce within the context of parking, and because that's usually how we've been thinking about variances when it arrives at this body. I did for staff's planning sake. I mean, are we talking about considering a variance, considering an amendments on your thresholds for variances, and also an amendment on looking at your parking ratios?
Well, I would think one could, if that's what you're thinking too, is one could affect the other.
Well, it could. I mean, I guess I'm just what I think from a staff perspective. Are you looking to tinker with the variance issue and the degrees of the variances that you allow the staff to do because you're thinking of it exclusively through the parking lens? Or is this just a general matter of principle as far as staff's level of discretion?
I would say more general man.
Okay.
General principle. And and again, it's like, you don't want to hit the good kid with the stick. But, you're trying to look out for what could happen versus what is happening necessarily. And that's our job. Because you look at it and you could have some things look significantly different. Depending on who's the decision maker. Like you said, if it was somebody who was less vested. And, we just want to make sure that we get it right. That's the most important thing. Commissioner Wilcox, anything?
Yes, Chair Stephenson. I think I actually raised this issue during the Fox Ridge hearing as far as their parking requirements, and they didn't quite meet them, actually. They got a variance, I believe. During that particular hearing, I had a serious problem with staff having 30% leeway. I thought that was pretty excessive. So, that could have been approved without going before Planning Commission entirely.
And since you bring up Fox Ridge, I look at that one and staff made the decision to bring it to Planning Commission. They didn't have to, but they did. And I think at the end of the day, with the testimony from the community and the way that development went, that was the right thing to do. I think we're all better for it. But I guess back to that, what would it have looked like if the staff person didn't go through that step? And did the variances, and what would we be faced with?
Agreed. The optics were good there. Chris
Yeah.
did the right call. And I think that I'm very concerned that if we tried to make a change to the parking, because right now, what's our standard 2.3? 2.3. I'm afraid that if we try to make a change to that standard right now, our optics to the Planning Commission may not be good with the public. I'm a little worried about that.
Could I offer just some food for thought since this is a conversation?
Yes, absolutely.
You could be worried about it at the same rate. What you're seeing, and I'm not going to even just limit this to multifamily development. I'm going to also throw commercial development in there, even though we haven't had a lot of cases like this. What you're seeing is increasingly more and more studies suggesting that your existing parking standards are excessive, even though you're in a suburban environment. So you may also run into the problem where every application, or soon to be a lot of your applications, are going to need to come before you anyway because of your existing standards. So I appreciate the concern. You don't want to tinker with it because there's been recent history on it, but at the same rate, you guys might have to face the music anyway because the developers are coming in, and they're coming not armed with just suggestions or promises on how they think their traffic studies are going to load out. They're going to show you statistical analysis and data that show their use actually generates this. And if they're smart, they'll show you comparators not from downtown Portland or from even Gresham. They'll show you outerlying communities in the region and show you, hey, these communities have this standard, your standard is way high. This is justification for me to get a variance. And that is very good defensible things that if they were to appeal a decision that they disagreed with you, you could be running into this headache continuously too. So I'm not trying to disagree with your presumption about timing or optics. I'm just saying, I think.
No, and you're spot on, because this is the same thing you've been telling us now for a while.
But it is ultimately this community's code, and you guys are responsible for advising the council on your code. I mean,
But like what would the standard for, let's say Eagle Ridge, since those are the numbers I've got, the standard would be 1.5, correct?
No, not necessarily. It varies from community to community, but for an apartment complex of the scale and caliber of an Eagle Ridge and what Fox Ridge will bring, the developers will tell you they look at 1.6 to 1.9 parking spaces per unit as being kind of within their capacity. And if your numbers are holding true from Eagle Ridge, and there's no reason to doubt that, when you take the cars per unit threshold and the calculation, that's within that range that you observed, and that's within the range that the staff observed when we were making that comparison analysis during our staff report for Fox Ridge.
This is Commissioner Allen when there's an opportunity.
I'm done. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was just going to mention that isn't the House bill that we're changing our code for about to change all this? You know, are we going to be pressured into doing what we know is not enough?
Certainly not for multifamily housing or for commercial. For duplexes, there is no longer can you require this amount of parking. For the tris and quadplexes, there is a limit to the number of vehicles you can allow per unit. I hesitate to go further because you have a hearing about this in 2 weeks. So I don't want to get ahead or hypothesize on that too much. But the other thing I'll mention too is you right now in your code for single family homes have a 1 car, 1 off-street space per single family home. So you have a single family home. Now, most homes in Troutdale have more than 1 car parked on their property. Right. So, you know, part of it is also seeing balance in your code. And also when the development community is looking at your code and seeing things like that, where you have 1 space per unit for your single family home, and then you're requiring 2 1/3 for a multifamily housing project, and traffic studies are suggesting that multifamily housing have less trips per unit than single family house, something is mathematically amiss. I'm just saying that's the conversations. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that those are the types of things that developers see in these types of analysis. So if we're going to have a conversation about parking, you don't want to sardine yourselves into just trying to tinker with one thing. You need to really make it a more global conversation as far as what is the standard, how do you apply it geographically across the city. There are certain things, like Commissioner Allen was just saying, there are certain things the state are going to ramrod through and you have no control over. But there are still some things within your control. And where you have to find that balance is finding a scale that's appropriate for Troutdale, but one that also makes sense for the purpose of developability. Because the one thing you don't want to do is either scare off development or force development every time to take a chance to come to this board and successfully argue their way in there when their analysis says their impact is really not going to be as detrimental as we may fear it might be. And there's no right or wrong answer, folks. I mean, that's part of your mission.
Right. Commissioner Wilcox?
Yeah, you're reading my mind. I wanted to comment on using the single family home standard as the standard. Most, Troutdale being a suburban community, most houses have at least a 1-car garage. Most have a 2-car garage, from what I've observed. So even with a 1-car garage, you've got a enclosed garage, you've got a driveway, and the way the streets and the houses are laid out, just about every house is going to have a curbside, at least one curbside space in front of them. So you're really looking at 3 potential spaces with every single family home. And if you got a 2-car garage, you got 4 spaces on site and, you know, at least 1 on the street. So I don't think it's a fair comparison to say, you know, you're only requiring one per single family detached when that's not the reality.
Okay.
Just as we were talking about Fox Ridge before, I'll just bring up the point that I think most people use their garages for storage. It's especially homeowners, not a lot of them use them for actual parking. So I think we're back to the driveway. You know, there's a balance in there somewhere of what is actually used, what is not. But if our standard is, you know, 1 for a single family home, I mean, that is the minimum, that is the standard. But I don't know what this body thinks as far as actually addressing to see if we can move our standard or not, but it does sound like we're high compared to other communities.
Well, on the multifamily one, you are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when it comes to
But
multifamily, yeah.
Yeah, and we haven't done a full analysis of non-residential, but there are probably areas where you are high and there might even be areas where you're low. But ultimately it has to fit your community. But particularly, and this again brings it back to the variance consideration. If you aim too high, you can expect to see variance applications. Yeah, and then based on where you want to draw that line, you know, that determines how many you see, regardless of who your staff may or may not be, or the discretion that your staff does in bringing forth applications to you, even if they are approvable at our level.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's multiple businesses that have had bad experiences with planning commissions and won't even bring it because of their experience levels before that.
Well, yeah, and you know, we try to also forecast, you know, we know parking is a topic of interest, dare I say, animosity for some people in this community. And that I don't mean that negatively, but there's a lot of hard opinions and feelings about it. If we have a multifamily project going in, and yeah, they were, I think, at what, like 12% was the variance they were asking for, something like that. Could we have approved it? Yeah, but there was also a high degree that it was going to be appealed because there still was a neighbor notification requirement. So we told the applicant we could either, you know, we think there's a high degree you're going to be appealed. You also then have the suspicion that maybe staff was trying to sneak something by, even though that's not the case, even if the code perfectly allowed you to do it, allowed us to make a decision. So we thought from optics and from a community engagement rationale, it was wise for us to bring it to this level. And your code allows that. I mean, your code is very explicit about it. Do you, I guess, you know, do you force that for every issue? And I know we've been talking about parking, and I don't want to necessarily take you off parking if you want to talk about it some more.
No,
But take into account, for instance, let's say you had a 5-foot setback, side setback on your property. And let's say you have a house, and because of a beautiful tree or there's some other situation on your property, you have to shift your house just a little bit. So your 5-foot setback, you're really asking for 4 feet, right? Right now, we would be able to handle that internally. That's a 20% reduction of the dimensional standard. Does that rise to the level where you guys feel like you need to be involved? Maybe not. But if you're going to change maybe the threshold as far as when and how, at what percentage, like if you want anything above 10%, guess what? You're hearing that. Again, there's no right or wrong answer, folks. It's, you know, this is, yeah. But that's another practicality. A variance is a variance. There are some communities, Alex did some research, and we can maybe pull some of it up, or if that wants to be part of your future packet. Some communities actually will allow staff certain sections of the code or certain provisions that we can handle locally or among staff. Others might have to be kicked up to a higher degree of decision-making. Right now, you just have an across-the-board percentage standard.
So a lot of them are broken down. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna ask a clarifying question. So we could say, 10 to 30 on the code, but anything above 10 on parking could come before plan.
I mean, there are some communities that handle like that. I think you want to speak to that a little bit? 'Cause you saw-
Yeah, I was looking at a few different communities in Oregon and quite a few of them actually. I know that we just have percentages that don't necessarily specify to what you were deviating from, but certain communities had actual standards that, you could apply for a variance for lot coverage, depth, landscaping, width standards at different percentile. So I think that kind of allowed for some flexibility that I saw, which was
Yeah, like
pretty interesting.
like on screen right here, we have Milwaukee.
Mhm.
Allows limited variations of numerical standards, like in the case of side yard situations, up to 40%. For 25% on those things. So you could drill down to that level of detail.
Yeah, I think depending on the potential impact is what they were looking at here is their percentage as far as letting staff make a decision on it. If it's something that's not a very high impact, but the value of, percentage is greater, then that would be more of a staff level decision versus something that's more of a high visibility impact, then that's something they would have bumped up to.
And I don't know that that's ever something that we've done, have we?
Not that I recall. no.
The standard different for different parts of the code.
Might be something you want to consider.
Yeah, for sure.
That way you're not maybe throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to
Yes.
speak.
Right.
Have certain flexibilities for things that are truly not greatly impactful to the surrounding community.
Or high outcomes.
That work?
If that's kind of a general consensus that we could maybe offer some suggestions on where we think your critical points are, things that you want to have involved in that. I guess parking will be one of them. I guess before we go back to the drawing board, suggest code changes. Are there other standards that you regulate in a code that you think are important for your consideration beyond parking? Landscaping percentage, active space, things of that nature, anything like that?
We just hear so much about parking. It's just such a high concern for the public. That's the one thing that the public should know that we're hearing on a regular basis, and we're advocating for them that.
And I would say height comes up a lot too. That might be one that, that we would need to look at, but you said as far as open space and some of those, not as much.
We talk about parking, he brought up a interesting thing, how many people don't shop in downtown Troutdale because of lack of parking. And empty parking spots in an apartment complex does not help parking in the downtown area.
Right.
And if you take those number that you used, and if they took that square footage and put up more apartments, what happens with parking ratio at that point?
Would be worse.
You know?
This is Commissioner Allen.
Hello, sir.
So there's been a lot thoughtful talk here, and I appreciate that. And I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but maybe Chris can expound on it. So I think what some of us are feeling is when we go to visit friends in Gresham, Fairview, Wood Village, there's not much trouble. But when we try to visit our friends in Portland, it's stressful. It's very difficult to find a spot to park. How did Portland get to where it is, to where it's so undesirable?
You could ask that on a lot of fronts. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, man. Where to begin? Let me try to answer that very specific question a little bit more broadly, and I'll give you more of a general scheme. Parking takes up land, right? You can stack it through a garage, you can underground it through an underground and put a thing, those have expenses behind it, but parking inevitably takes up space. And when you're thinking about a parking lot, you are trying to accommodate a large vehicle, or a vehicle at least 16 feet in length and 6 feet in width that needs turning movements and all this other stuff. And what does a parking lot do? It holds a vehicle that is not in operation. It's a closet if you think about it. So if I'm a developer and I have a finite amount of land to work with where I can actually get a return of investment, parking is the last thing I want to build. So if I am in a city like a Portland, a denser environment where I like Mr. Pompeo said earlier tonight in his testimony, using an example as from his family in another country, and you see this, of course, if you travel to Europe or Asia or whatever, or even larger cities in this country, and you could even say Portland to a degree, density for those types of communities, which is not desirable at that degree out here, but density allows for the ability to have people be carless. They can take transit. They have the ability to walk to things or do things. And that is fine for those locations. Coming from a community like ours to there is a little bit difficult because we're not used to it. Also, the propensity of finding parking is hard. And then when you have such a limited supply of parking, then you have to put, quite frankly, a price to it. What is the value? What is the price you are willing to pay to be able to park conveniently with your own vehicle? And if you're not willing to do that, what is your other option of doing there? Would you willing to take a bus or a Max or whatever to get to your location? So think about, I guess when we're answering that question, I think you have to think about the price of land, the motivation of the developer, what the city or the community is looking for, and then what solutions can be offered in wake of that parking. In our community, I think we hear loud and clear that people enjoy the convenience, the flexibility, the expectation of how our community has grown over a 50-year period, where we are a community that needs a car to get around. We can have locations like our downtown where we can encourage walkability. We might even be able to build facilities like trails that can maybe stretch it out a little bit further. But we're also a very sloping community. We are a community that, hell, we had hail and snow and sunshine in a 1 hour period yesterday. Not everybody wants to walk. We don't have the density to get regular bus service. We never will. We don't have, nor I guess many of you probably wouldn't want a light rail system to begin with, but at the same rate, that's kind of the thing. So it's okay, it's appropriate for us to have that higher degree of a parking requirement. That's also how we're choosing to use the land. What we're finding, though, are people who have developed in communities similar to ours, or communities frankly more denser than ours, that see opportunity in this community, that bring the experience of what they've built and also the lessons learned of, gosh, I wish I could have done this with this project. And what we find, and I think if you asked, you talked to the person managing Eagle Ridge, right?
Mhm.
When you talk to the developer, to Mr. Waidilla's point, the developer will of course say, I could have fit easily 20 or 24 more apartments, and I still would have been okay with my parking. The developer could have also said, maybe I didn't need that additional development, but maybe I could have kept a few more trees up. These are the value propositions we're talking about. You guys, and rightfully so, because you hear it from the community, place a high value to make sure that the parking that a development provides can be accommodated by the development that's there. But that value also has a cost proposition. Does it cost you a more optimal layout architecturally? Does it cost you additional tree cover? These are the conversations you guys are rightfully having tonight. But at the end of the day, it goes back to what do you truly value? In the greatest sense of the word, what do you value is important for your community and your community's growth. So I'm sorry, Mr. Allen, if I kind of expanded on that, but that's really the heart of the matter here. And that's why it is different there. It's different here from Portland. And to your point, you know, the urban communities that you have in Gresham and Fairview and Wood Village, yeah, it's easier to find stuff there, but their standards are also lower, and it hasn't really changed too much the dynamic among our respective communities. End of my dissertation.
So no, that's what I was looking for. I appreciate it. So I was stationed in Spain in the military, and it was pretty easy getting around without a vehicle. But weather was nice. It was flat. I gotta tell you, when the weather's bad here, it's wet or windy, and I'm going downtown and coming back up that hill. Yeah, I'm not as young as I used to be, and so it's not as easy for me. That's seems to be a driver that I experience. But I appreciate the thoughtfulness. That's what I was looking for.
So you want to come back with some recommendations? Is that what
Well,
you're
you tell us what you would want to see to advance this
Parking
topic.
analysis of other communities.
rural communities?
Okay. But do we also look at the variance threshold that we're talking about too?
With height and parking being separated out from.
Yeah, I would think those are the two. And then obviously, you know, you're thinking where the other ones really yard, property line setbacks, but you don't have too many issues with those typically. Right, even if you're granting 30%.
You mean as far as neighbor complaints
Yeah.
or concerns?
Yeah.
I can't think of one.
I think we start with that and see if we do. I mean,
Mhm.
we could always come back later if we
Right.
need to.
Yeah, from there. Okay. That work?
Do we have a number of complaints about that?
About setbacks?
Yeah.
That's what I was asking, and I don't think that we do.
No, I mean, the complaints when we have variances or as you all have accurately reflected parking. And it's not complaints, I should say concerns.
Parking and height are the two big ones that I hear.
And if there are issues out there that need to be addressed, certainly address them, but if they don't need to be addressed, why waste the time on it?
Right.
Right.
Just leave it the way it is presently. Address the ones we need to address. Or should address. Everyone okay with that?
Would you, just for clarification's sake, they are two different sections of the code, but they are in a way intertwined to tonight's discussion. Would you be comfortable with consolidating those two as a single respective amendment?
Which two?
Providing the parking research, and if there are any refinements you want to make on that, and then the variance threshold, or do you want to handle the variance one first as a separate item?
Variance
Separate, please.
separately.
Separate, okay. But you still want to have the research to continue that conversation?
Parking,
Yes,
I think it's necessary.
okay.
Agreed.
Everyone okay with that? I don't see him saying anything. Okay, so I take that as a yes. Okay. All right. Enough direction.
I think we've got it. We'll make
Okay.
some sense of it. And thank you, Alex, for your research on that.
Alex has it, right? Yeah, you got it. Okay. Okay. I think that's it.
I guess switching to the department report, a couple of things for you, since we haven't talked enough about parking tonight. There is actually right now, and I don't know if Councilor Glantz, who I see has joined the call, there's actually a meeting going on tonight of the Parks. Hi. You need intro music. You usually play intro music at the council meeting, so
She will if we let her.
Okay. The Parks Advisory Committee, which normally meets next week, is meeting actually tonight because of the Budget Committee is next week. They are actually talking about this very fun issue, and they're talking about it very specifically to Glen Auto Park.
I was listening.
You have a summary?
Yeah, they think it's really important. I was kind of laughing, listening in on you guys talking about parking and hearing parking on the other computer about how important it is. So I'm not going to comment.
Fair enough. Where that leads to it, and I think where we're heading, I should say too, it's been in the budget now for a couple of years. I believe it's in this prospective budget. The city has monies set aside to do a larger comprehensive parking study for, as originally envisioned, the downtown area, as Mr. Pompeo was saying tonight. So that would be a geographic uniqueness because we have public parking lots there. We have uses coming in that is going to generate a lot of traffic. There are possibilities, and we talked about it in the framework plan for the confluence site of maybe a structured parking facility. That is stuff that we can study, that have been programmed into our budget to begin work on. And as we're leaving this pandemic environment, this might be the year we commence that. In doing that, we might be able to also dovetail a Glen Auto parking study. If we're already having people studying parking in this community, Glen Auto has its issues. I would argue they're somewhat unique from downtown, but they are somewhat still interconnected. So that's what they're talking about tonight. But long and short of it is, at some point, probably in the next couple of months, we may want to kick off a parking study. How and where this committee, this group discusses that, unclear right now, unless you all have thoughts on that.
Do we have a big parking issue at Glen Auto? We do downtown. At Glen Auto?
What do you think, Mr. Lee?
I think there's a tenant down there that brings a lot of parking there, which affects the summertime. Summertime people want to use it. That's not.
That's what we've heard too.
You do, but that's
Very weather related, seasonally relevant.
Well, Sugar Pine fills it up with it no matter what the weather is.
but that's also, I would probably argue to some extent a shorter term situation.
It's not a year-round situation.
They're building another facility, which is much larger than this one, which I would anticipate would take some of the pressure off of this one, so it might not be as big an issue.
I know we are doing the pancake breakfast Easter egg hunt Saturday, and they asked us what our time is because they'll block off the park for however many spaces when the park itself needs, so that Sugar Pine does not affect the parking of the events that are going on.
So they would block off spots to not be
They'll-
used by Sugar
They'll
Pine,
take a section of it, yes,
right?
so that Sugar Pine can't use it.
Does Sugar Pine have any dedicated parking?
There are 7 spots dedicated for Sugar Pine.
And they take 100. Am I exaggerating?
No.
Yeah.
No, and the other thing too, that I think we've identified from a couple of people who've been irritated about it, who've complained about it. We are the only, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong or what the solution is, but this is the fact. We are now the only recreational facility, meaning Glen Auto Park's the only recreation facility on the Sandy River that doesn't have a day use fee for parking. So if you're in the know and you want to go on the river and you don't want to pay to go on the river, and you know you have a decent beach access already there, why pay $5 at Lewis and Clark or $5 at Dabney or Oxbow when I can go to Glen Auto for free?
And get Sugar Pine.
Right.
I don't argue that. I can tell you though, if we charge, and that might be a route to go, that's gonna spill it over to Lewis and Clark and the east side of the river. even more than it does today. What you typically see is once the temperature breaks 90, all bets are off. And I'd probably feel a little bit better if we were in a culture where people parked partially in the road, they might get ticketed or towed, or parked up on a curb, or, you know, in a right of way somewhere. It was actually some type of ramification.
Well, you speak to a pretty important point. That's the enforcement issue, the management issue of it. And the resources, frankly, today are stretched thin. You don't have, I mean, right now you don't have time parking down there. You don't have a meter there. So there's no person checking in on that. You have a deputy who is assigned to beach patrol there, but they are doing all sorts of things and often have to be called to other locations. You know, we're not saying there's any answers to this, but it has come up enough that the Parks Advisory Committee has been debating it as far as what should be done. Because we've heard the concerns. We hear people in the community saying, I've lived here 20, 30, 40 years. I don't go to Glen Auto Park anymore. I can't find a spot. And there are management issues related not only to parking, but also behavioral issues, quite frankly. I'm not a social scientist, but a lot of people have at least alleged that said free parking attracts a certain crowd. People who are willing to pay for the parking, maybe we don't have as many issues, perhaps, if you're, you know, putting that standard. But then the question becomes, you know, are you boxing out the community that has already used tax dollars to pay for the park that they should be enjoying? But are those same people now being boxed out because they don't feel they can access the park because there's no management of it right now?
So next Saturday, next Saturday was, let's say, 75 degrees. You've got Sugar Pine, you've got people going down to the river because it's a sunny, nice day, and you've got a memorial service going on in the Sandcox. Right. So I know if you look at the calendar, I think there were 3 memorial services on Saturdays this month there. So the park is being, and the building's being used for weddings and services and all sorts of groups. The park is being used for, and we've got Sugar Pine. And all of a sudden, people are parking across the bridge and walking over here for a memorial service because it was full or whatever.
So I guess to throw another angle at it, this community is the one that is paying for the park and maintaining the park, paying for the parking, maintaining the parking. And is it this community that's able to use it?
Make reservations.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things you possibly can do. The only thing, and I know Sugar Pine's really popular, but I think if this ends up being like a Sugar Pine thing, I don't think that's going to work very well. You know, if we're looking at parking for Sugar Pine, I just think that's going to be hard on the community.
Agreed.
But, you know, we can't have a facility like that and not have it be accessible. It's the other side.
But I think we all agree something's got to change.
Down there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're thinking it might be as simple as charging.
Well, I wouldn't put it so simply, because you can charge, but there are ways you can charge intelligently. If I'm wanting to, I'm a parent, If my kids wanted to blow off some steam and just hit the playground at Glenada Park for 45 minutes, it's not the same as somebody who's bringing in pink flamingos and floating down the Sandy for 10 hours. Should I have to pay for parking just so my kids, or should I have to pay a $5 days fee so I can have a right to use the playground for 45 minutes? No, probably not. But if I'm taking up one of 100 spaces that is so valuable, we were talking about value earlier. How valuable of an asset is this? Never mind, you have a beautiful location, you have a great amenity. You also have an extremely very popular business that has 40,000 Instagram followers. That is, when most people are thinking of Troutdale, particularly if you're in Portland, they say, oh, Sugar Pine. It's a name association thing. You go back to, is it worth my time going there? Do I have value in going there? That's a community question. What do you value? What is the value of your access to your park? Might you be able to carve out a niche for Troutdale residents? Maybe if you present your water bill, maybe you get a hang tag that allows you to park for free. Maybe you set a certain number of parking spaces in that lot for, if I'm having an event at Sam Cox, I know I can rely on 10 spaces. Nobody else can park there. The issue is, when we've talked about parking in this community, we only ever talk about the supply. How many spaces do I have? Crap, I've got to build 20, 30, 50 more spaces. Well, that costs money. We haven't really explored demand management. And paying for parking is a tool of demand management. It is not the only demand management you can do. And that's what a parking study does for you. It explores those demand management options before you sink yourself into a capital project to find property where you might be able to get X number of spots. But if you do the math, and when you have a finite supply of something, in this case, it's land, and land is not getting any cheaper, what is your cost per parking space? Is that really valuable to you when you could have done another solution or exhausted every other option before you just turn to the supply route? That's what a parking study can do for you. That doesn't mean you have to agree or do everything it says you should do, but it at least helps you investigate all other options based on the scenario you have. And if at the end of the day, you don't want to charge for parking, that's fine. That's a community decision. If at the end of the day, you realize that might be your only way out to have an effective management system, then that might be your route. But you got to explore it.
What's the investment in a parking study?
We have, I think, 75,000 budgeted for downtown, and I think Glenada would be covered in that. I'd have to double check for you. We can make sure we do it by next week. But we have at least that amount of money set aside, and it's been, what, in the past 3 budgets, I think. We just haven't executed it because of COVID, quite frankly. But the same principle could be used also for downtown. Have you exhausted every option of management, of demand management, before we just say we need more parking? From a staff perspective, we argue we have not exhausted every option before we just simply say we need to build more supply.
And we're not advocating for more supply.
No, I'm not saying you are, but I'm saying the conversation, when it's typically been had, is there's not enough parking. It's a refrain you hear. There's not enough parking. There's not enough convenient parking. Do we know that for sure? Have we really studied that? Do we know that? That's what we're saying. And that's what a parking
And it
study can
is
help us.
not enough parking is a common thread.
Right.
And as I've said before, that's often a good thing.
Yeah.
If you're light on parking, that means you've got people coming to your business.
Right.
So there's a plus side to that.
Yeah.
But then you get to a point where it works against you too. You just have to find that balance.
Cars are going away.
Tell that to Metro.
The town center committee, where we had this discussion, cars are going away. You can't get loans on parking structures.
But you can. You just usually have to have a repurpose plan.
You have to have a repurposed plan, or you have a public sector with a lot more collateral than we have as a community, or a lot more lending capacity.
the driverless cars will drop you off at Glen Auto. Come pick you up when you tell them
You know, it's a drone with a rope on it. Just-
to. So,
Okay. Well, you open that can, didn't you?
Well, you were the ones who all talked about parking tonight. We just had to add icing to the cake.
Any other comments from Counselor Lance?
Don't you miss this?
Yeah, she's over there shaking her head.
Sandy's like, no.
No,
I've adequately learned my lesson.
what's that?
I've adequately learned my lesson.
Thank you. We appreciate you. Give us something to do. Okay.
Appreciate you too.
Beyond that, again, you have a meeting in 2 weeks. There is going to be a little topic on the agenda, House Bill 2001 text amendment coming in. We are expecting your staff report to be out the door here soon. We're putting the finishing touches on it. I am, unlike a lot of our typical staff reports where we usually try to get comments in beforehand, I am expecting a lot of comments to be received after you all get the staff report. So one thing that we'll do is we'll give you the report, but we may also be giving you, prior to the meeting, additional testimony we may receive in that time. So just be on the lookout for that. I think we'll have the staff report out to you no later than Friday, but then just keep paying attention to your email inboxes. If anybody wants paper copies of these comments too, we'll obviously provide them, but we'll provide you a paper copy of the staff report as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. Confirming also, you all had talked about it at your last meeting, that in case we run into a second night, Tuesday, May 3rd was your backup date, if you needed that. So just please keep that date open just in case we go 2 nights. Council's scheduled to hear it then the following Tuesday on the 10th and then the 24th. And those are pretty important targets to make sure we get this text amendment through before the state law kicks in.
Okay. So we're the 27th and then
27th, and then your next meetings would be potentially the 3rd and then definitely the 11th.
okay. Is there a stipend that comes?
Oh, no.
She didn't hear that.
Couple days of budget.
Is there a
couple days
stipend that
of
comes with this?
One safety.
No. She didn't even like that.
Moving along, we have also, you have the budget committee is next week, Monday and Wednesday. If anyone is interested, 2 of you, of course, are on the budget committee. And then lastly, even though this committee will only have a vacancy for the alternate position, there are plenty of vacancies out there for the other city boards and committees. Please.
I think they all have vacancies.
I think all but this one do. Yeah. So if you are interested or other people you know are interested in committees, please encourage them to apply. The deadline for committee recruitment is actually a month from today. So you still have a month to get in your packets. The CAC, I think, is setting up a table at the first Friday event, which is Friday the 6th. And they'll have committee material and hopefully good engagement with hopefully dozens of people at least who will be going through the street that night.
Historic landmarks, public safety and equity, parks, planning commission, budget committee.
And Town Center Advisory Board.
Town Center Advisory Board.
Yep. And if anybody has any questions, I actually met with a young lady earlier today about some committee interest. If anybody has questions or wants more detail from the staff, we welcome anybody approaching us, and we'll be happy to chat with them about options, opportunities, obligations, so forth.
Great way to get involved and give back to your community, for sure.
With that, relatively short tonight. Alex, were we missing anything else? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your feedback, commentary, and we appreciate the direction. We'll be in touch soon.
Appreciate you guys, all the work that you do. Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Wydilla, anything?
Nope.
No, all good. Okay, Commissioner Allen.
I appreciate the thoughtful comments made tonight. It was very nice. Nothing else to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Wilcox.
No, nothing.
Commissioner Wood?
Just reiterating a comment that I had before about the one-ways in downtown. If those messages ever got across, because I literally was head on with somebody else the other day. Same kind of thing. If you could just pass that note along, that'd be fantastic.
Yes, we will. We've had some conversations with the county since it's partially their street, partially our street about some options to improve it. So.
Fantastic. And other than that, nope, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, nothing here. And with that, motion to adjourn.
Chair, I'll make a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting.
Second.
I'll second.
Okay, motion is second to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye.
Bye.
Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, one sec, sorry. Yes.